beyond the obvious. And today I have my special she's the voice and presence coaching on the guests, none other than Miss Sandra Bargman.
Hello, Daniel, and hello to your listeners. It's lovely to be here.
Welcome, Miss Sandra. Can you please introduce more about yourself to the
Oh, I'd love to. Well, in a nutshell, I popped out of the womb, you could say, singing and dancing and acting and being creative and imaginative as kids are. And that was very supported in my family. I was also the kid that was off in the corner with the antenna on that could read the energy of the room. So I was also pretty plugged in spiritually. And so through the course of my life, those two tracks were very prevalent. Because my parents really supported the performing end of things. Um, I, I did that from the age of 3 on, and I went to college for it. I went to conservatory and became a professional actor and singer and voice actor and teacher and voice coach and director. And at the same time, I was always very interested in my spiritual yearnings and explorations and curiosities. And so, I would read all the books of the times and got into Eastern mysticism and New Age thought and, the whole gambit. And then when I was in my early 40s, I really felt the call to service in a much more deep way. And so I started to do life coaching, but that wasn't quite the right fit for me. And then I was on a website reviewing a coaching website, and off in the corner was a word interfaith minister. And this light bulb goes off. And within a week, I had interviewed at some interfaith seminaries and had been accepted by the one that I really wanted to attend. So, concurrent with all of my acting work, I went to seminary. I went actually, I was ordained through one seminary, and then I went to another one for counseling, an advanced certification for spiritual counseling. So, I had 4 years of seminary and went and began my ministry in that way. And then within 5 years, I combined those two into a business called Sacred Stages, combining my ministry and my desire to be outspoken about my spiritual understandings and my teachings, combined it with my performing background. And I created this company, Sacred Stages, and the first show that I did was called The Edge of Every Day. It was a solo show that I used music and comedy, and I structured it as a ritual, and people could explore the concepts the way that they wanted to. Then COVID hit. I turned the solo show into a podcast, which I'm still doing to this day, and it's changed my life immeasurably, and it's really sharpened my desire to bring my voice out in a bigger way, my own concepts, my own, sharing my voice in a more broader sense, if you will. So that's me in a nutshell. So all three of my tracks.
Well, Miss Sandra, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Here on Uptrack, I say we celebrate you.
I'm sorry. That's great.
We celebrate you, Miss Sandra.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to steal that idea and put it in my own podcast.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And let's talk about creativity as a tool for transformation, voice, presence, and
presence. Sound great. Part of the combination of those two tracks of the actor skills and the willingness to explore oneself through these actor skills, combining that with the spiritual intelligence and the inner wisdom of my spiritual work. I combine those two into a process, a method, if you will, called the Big Approach. B stands for breath, I stands for intention, and G stands for genuineness. So I work on voice and presence and storytelling with my clients using that. But in
Mhm.
the broader sense, to get to your question, is the power of creativity to really transform your life. You know, everyone thinks that it's creative. You know, if you're an artist, then you must be creative, and if you're not, then you're not creative, which is simply not true. I mean, we're creating our life. Every single one of us is creative. It's just the willingness to give yourself permission to explore that aspect of who you are. So, you know, the actor skills that really highlight the relationship of creativity and how it can really help you with your presence is the I said the word permission. It's really the permission to give yourself the time and the space to explore what creativity means to you. Creativity is inner listening, it is playfulness, it is being attentive to the here and the now, which is where healing takes place. Creativity gets you out of your head and into your body, which is where presence and healing takes place in your body, not your head, not thinking about it, in your body in lived experience. Um, Creativity is attentiveness, it's mysterious, it brings you into all of the ways that you can know yourself more deeply and therefore show up in the world more authentically and more real without the mask on. Creativity gives you the permission to be playful, to role play. One of the things that I love doing with clients in my spiritual counseling is I ask them to write about a situation that they want to retell the story. I said, you know, because storytelling, it's so powerful. Storytelling with creativity. There's two different ways that we storytell. We storytell about how we share out in the world, and we also storytell and about a self reflection, about our self narrative, what we think about ourselves. And so, one of the ways that I work with people is shifting the story they tell themselves, that self narrative. And I get them to write a monologue about a situation that they want to think about differently, or that they want to resolve, or they want to experience what happened and be able to say some of the things that in the moment they didn't get a chance to say, or that they were too afraid to say. So I asked them to write it all out and to stand up and to say it to the person or in the situation like an actor would do. And see how it feels. And was it truthful? Is there something you want to shift? Is there something else that you want to rewrite? So all of these ways of weaving creativity into your storytelling, how you look within, they're all ways of helping people to share their voice more in a larger way out in the world, to share their voice even if it's not in a large way, to share their truth with those who are in their life, with whom they work or with whom they live, or potentially possibly have disagreements with. So all of these ways of exploring using actor skills to use creativity to get more in touch with who you are, which of course, know thyself, the great Greek maxim, which is at the heart of any creative journey. It's at the heart of any spiritual journey, and it's at the heart of any leadership journey.
Well said, Miss Sandra. You say finding yourself is the wrong goal. That's a provocative opening. What is the better
Mm.
goal, and why does chasing a big self actually keep people stuck?
I'm sorry. I'm having trouble hearing you. Your volume went way down.
Mhm. So you say finding yourself is the wrong goal. That's a provocative opening. What is the better goal, and why does chasing a fake self actually keep people stuck?
Oh, yes, I love it. Well, I think people always believe that there's something that they need to grasp onto that they haven't quite done. When I believe that the goal is to set down the things that stand in the way of you being your authentic self. For instance, how do I show up? Do I show up in situations with a mask on? Not literally, but figuratively. I mean, do I show up in ways that does not feel in alignment with who I am? So it's not a question of, I need to be more this, I need to be more that. No, I need to set down the things that stand in the way of me actually being who I am, actually sharing my authentic self, and actually speaking my truth. And so it's not a question of reaching for something I don't have. It's mining the things within me, not comparing to someone else, not trying to be something I'm not, trying to be the best version of me, setting the things down that get in the way of that. So it's not grasping for, it's allowing what is to come forward.
Well said, Miss Sandra. You were 3 or 4 years old when you are marched into the kitchen, hands on the hips, and announced, "I'm here on a mission."
You're
Do you
on a
know that
mission.
mission was then?
Yes, my mother. About a couple of years before she passed away, and I was spending a lot of time with her when she was undergoing cancer treatment, and I couldn't believe that she had never told me this story, and she just brings it up nonchalantly. She said, "Yeah, well, you're like 3 or 4. You came into the kitchen and you were all full of yourself with your hands on your hips, and you told me you were here on a mission." And I was like, are you kidding me? That's unbelievable. And but the truth is that I have felt that my whole life. Daniel, my entire life, I have felt like I'm on a mission. All of the work that I've done as an actor, as an interfaith minister, as a spiritual, someone who wants to share spiritual teachings. I hesitate to use the word spiritual leader because I think that's it's becoming a bit difficult in today's world. There's been some abuse of spiritual leadership, and so I hesitate to use that word. But and my work with as a teacher, and I've worked with people of all ages on voice and presence and storytelling. I've worked with professionals, older people. I've worked with senior citizens in their creative life and just wanting to perform. I've worked with young kids, every age bracket I've worked in. It's all about know thyself, and and that is my mission. What to My mission is to be my most authentic self in this lifetime. What to say, how to say, and why it's important is at the heart of everything that I do, and helping people to do the same for themselves.
Know thyself. Yes, you say we need the courage to be disliked. That's easy to say and excruciating to do. What's the recent moment you had to practice it, and what did it cost you in the moment?
That is a life that the courage to be disliked that comes from. That's part of a quote that I have. I'm also an author, and I'm a contributing author to two different books. The first one I wrote, Anger and the Reluctant Leader, and that's in On the Shoulders of Mighty Women by Leslie Michaels, a dear friend of mine who has since passed. And most recently, where that quote is from my chapter, Ferocious Compassion. It's in Love Notes 2.0, Stories of Transformation, and Compassion. And that's edited by Cynthia Gregory, and you can get that both of them on Amazon. Um, the Courage to Be Disliked, it's been a lifelong journey for me to, I think, in particularly for women, I think the whole people pleasing and the whole desire to feel safe through people pleasing. It's a trauma reaction to, and in some cases it's life or death, particularly for women. But if you're not in a threatened situation, people pleasing and not speaking your truth gives you entree into belonging in groups that we want to belong to. But it's also at the risk of betraying who we really are, lying to ourselves. So in making the decision to speak my truth in a really powerful way, and that's grown. It's not like a switch went off. It's been a lifelong practice. I've had to come to terms with, if you have big opinions, you're going to get big pushback. If you speak a truth that might trigger someone, they may not like you. And so you've got to make the decision at some point, hopefully earlier than later, but that not everyone's going to like you. And you probably might piss some people off. And you've got to be okay with that at some point. And I'm not encouraging anyone to be rude or cruel, but I am saying, take a look at what it is you're afraid to say, and take a look at the moment in which you find yourself afraid to say that thing, and be willing to unpack that, and be willing to say, now, how can I say what I really mean in a truthful way that's still compassionate? That's where ferocious compassion comes from, and that meets people where they are, is still kind, but not necessarily sugar-coated, sweet, nice.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Miss Sandra. And you say we need to courage, not in the chapter, I should say, in the chapter of Love Notes from the Soul 2.0, you write that people pleasing is a trauma response.
Yeah.
That's a heavy claim.
Yeah,
I just. The connection.
I'm sorry?
Walk us through that connection.
Well, yeah, I mentioned it in my last little bit. To expand on that, as young people, and I know that this happens for both men and women. It's just in our society, it continues for a long time, particularly for women. It's not just women, but it's really baked into the patriarchy that women people please. So, for instance, I can use my own life. I was not abused as a child, but I had a very overbearing father in ways that, for me personally, felt traumatic. He didn't let me, and I'm extremely communicative. I mean, my goodness, what I do for a living. And as a young person, I felt his heavy hand and his thumb on me to keep that down and tamp that down. And that was somewhat traumatic for me. And I was ridiculed, and as a little kid, that's not easy. Now, that's not physical abuse. It's not enormous, but it was traumatic. So I learned as a little kid to people please him for my own, just to get along and to not have him react to me in the ways that he did. We get out in the world. Now, for instance, you could take someone else who is in an physically abusive relationship, and they'll do anything to say the right thing, to people please for their own safety. Now, that's a huge spectrum, what I experience and what I just described. But there's all levels in between about if I'm a young person and I get kicked out of a group because I speak my mind, that's traumatic. And so you learn I'm going to say what pleases everybody else, so I don't get thrown out of this group, or I don't get shunned or shamed or ostracized. And so, it's very much equated with the trauma response.
Miss Sandra, you've created a methodology called the big approach, weaving an actor training. And why can't someone just take an acting class or just meditate?
Well, I've often said, I think every human on the planet should take an acting course. Everyone should do it. I think it's not only is it fun, I think it's a way for people to understand and give themselves permission to be more playful. So the big approach is the name of my methodology, and big period I period G period approach. And B stands for breath. That is the pillar that all of this work stands on, is getting out of the head into the body through the use of your breath. There's nothing you do that doesn't utilize good breath support. And that brings you into your somatic work. The breathing is very connected to that. Then we move into intention setting. All actors know a good intention. What is my intention for being on this podcast with you, Daniel? What do I hope? What do I want from this exchange? And in each moment of our lives, just being aware of what it is we want from the situation, from the relationship, and that will affect, knowing what that is, will affect how we communicate, how we utilize, and in conjunction with breath, our tone, our vocal diction, how we story tell. They're very linked together, intention and breath. Then we get to G, which stands for genuineness. Now, the big approach is really kind of a cheeky thing, cheeky name for me because I'm really tall. So I went with the big approach for that reason. But breaking it down, it makes perfect sense. The G stands for genuineness, which if we tease that apart, that's the true presence. That's genuineness, meaning authenticity. When you think about someone you think is very genuine, they're at ease in themselves. They are comfortable with their own story, their self-narrative. They can make fun of themselves. They're not easily triggered. They're emotionally intelligent, potentially spiritually intelligent. All of these things give great presence. That's genuineness. And so, all of the work that I do weaves all three of those things based on the storytelling. So the storytelling that I do with my coaching at Create Magic at Work. By the way, you can book at createmagicatwork.com. You can book a 20-minute session, and we can get to the heart of anything you might want to work on in your communication, in your messaging, in your storytelling, developing that. So coming up with a plan, do you feel like you need some voice and speech, actual diction work, or actual that kind of work? Do you feel that you're good in that, but you want to work on your breath and your tone and your intention? And then how are you storytelling? And we get to all of the exercises that I use to help people mine their stories, mine the themes of their lives, so they can talk about their origin story. They can talk about their leadership story. They can talk about their failure story. They have all of these examples that they can go through where they can pull out and give the theme and weave all these things together in a way that people can see themselves in.
So, Miss Sandra, to wrap up our discussion for today, what does it mean to uncouple your identity from your fear? It's a listener is terrified of public speaking, of speaking up in a meeting, what is the first small uncoupling they can do today?
Um, the first small uncoupling they can do is to reframe your fear of speaking, reframe it as excitement. Try to experience the butterflies that you may feel and think about some of the things that you've been excited to do in your life. That feeling of that you're interpreting as fear is actually your feeling of knowing that this is important and it's going to be really good for you.
Interesting, Miss Sandra. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your podcast, your book, or anything you want to promote on after this?
Excellent. Well, as I mentioned, you can book for a session, vocal, voice, presence, storytelling. You could book a 20-minute session to find out what it is I can do for you personally at createmagicatwork.com. My personal website is Sandra Bargman, BARGMAN.com. You can get On the Shoulders of Mighty Women and Love Notes 2.0. You can get both of those at Amazon, or you can request at your favorite independent bookstore. What else? The Edge of Everyday podcast. You can check that out. It's at magicthreadmedia.com. Again, that's magicthreadmedia.com. And it streams on all of your favorite podcast platforms. And I also have my own YouTube channel, Sandra Bargman, on the edge of every day.
Yes, people, let's connect with Miss Sandra Bargman because if you connected with her for some more and more empowering podcast episodes, more books to come, and for sure more projects will rise. So, Miss Sandra, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise, and Marty can't be